The other part of me is like things change and nothing. And as you say, it was like three or four generations of this formation that we've seen so far of English departments, prestige literature, field and period coverage. Um, this is how you were trained. This is how I was trained. You have a period, you cover some things, and then when you go out on the job market, you're covering that period. And departments need to have field coverage. They need to have a phalanx of Shakespeareans. You're in Victorian, maybe Restoration, oh my God, medieval, pre-modern, contemporary, right? And that's like English, right? And then there's some big names, so there's fields that everyone specializes in, and really that kind of academia gets its best moment in the post-war period after 1945 because there's this huge expansion of the university because of the GI Bill. So you have all these returning soldiers who are of different classes who enter the university and with government funding, right? Before this period of time, even the old fogies in the Yales and Harvards were like, oh my God, we're just a bunch of mediocre, like pseudo aristocrats reproducing our class. Like this is really horrible. We have to refresh our constituencies, and this is why like Harvard's president began to adapt the IQ test as the SATs to make a meritocracy rather than this. I call it a pseudo aristocracy because we don't really have a landed gentry in the United States, but there was certainly like the old families of the Northeast, that kind of wealthy, North, just like horrible, sorry, waspy culture that was actually quite anti-intellectual. I mean, one of the things that American academics or intellectuals kept trying to do was invigorate the university with this idea of research, which wasn't something that American universities were very good at. There were seminaries before the 19th century. This is what I discuss in my book, American Idol, Anti-Elitism as Social Critique. I take the PMC on in the subsequent book, but I really think like I look at like the larger picture of how do we produce knowledge? How do we produce prestige? What is this institution of the university and the humanities within it? And so I'm giving you like this big picture thing, and you mentioned that it's really like three generations, right? It's 45 till now where we have this idea that we're going to be teaching our students sort of we're going to have specializations. Let's just talk about graduate students, right? Each graduate student is going to have to make himself or herself recognizable through fields, through authors, and participate in this idea of prestige with regard to those fields and authors, because you're not going to be you're not going to be like Shakespeare will be better than who's that other guy I really like it? His contemporary. Oh my God, I can't remember. There's a hierarchy of literary quality, right? And Shakespeare's the highest quality guy. And then there's sort of lower quality people, and you want to focus on the higher quality, highest quality literature. I don't like this particular formation, but it comes out of post-war liberalism, a kind of Cold War impetus to fight for hearts and minds, to show that, I mean, I really believe this, that Americans were also sophisticated literary people because we were threatened by the Soviet Union and the Soviet Union's rise within the European intelligentsia as an attractive alternative, right? So we have this moribund American university suddenly, infused with funding, students, prestige, a research ethos, and, we can't forget, like, exiles from Europe, right? Especially German Jewish intellectuals who brought with them this idea of research. And in 1959, the Soviet Union puts Sputnik into orbit, and the Americans are like freaking out, right? Because it's like they're so advanced scientifically, technologically. We have to keep up. We have to surpass them. And there's just this infusion of cash that goes into the into research, into the research university that comes from the government. And that infusion of cash, along with, the wider public that the university serves, really puts, like, I think it was the pinnacle of the humanities as well in the 60s and the 70s. We know what happened in the 70s. It's like the post-counterculture. Everyone's like, austerity happens, budgets get cut, and also the counterculture, like young people just turn against the greats, right? So this gives way to the canon wars of the 80s, and by now we have like a complete like demotion of prestige, right? That comes a lot out of like left progressive critiques of the canon, right? I mean, I'm not like, oh, we need to keep everything the same way. I'm just like, let's look at what's happening because things are changing. What's happened in the English department at UC Irvine, for example, just from what I know about it, is that people have given up on field coverage. And, even in our department, film and media studies, we used to think like we needed to have the Europeanist, the South Asianist, European cinema, South Asian cinema. Our wish lists were always configured like this, right? And now all of that is gone because we hired, in game studies, we hired, new media keeps changing. And there's this idea that we have to keep up and diversify. So, all of that old field coverage stuff, it's gone. Like I could have said, like there's gonna be no one watching or teaching Italian neorealism. I could have said that. Nobody knows who Vittorio De Sica is, right? But I could have said no more De Sica in film studies. No more Kubrick. No. Just like we had that moment when film studies could have had these big auteurs and experts and specialists in those things. Many people are trained in that, but you know what? Gone. Just gone. We'll have people do field coverage. And, the thing that we could say is like, that was such old stick and mud stuff. And we have all this new diversity. But what has actually happened at UC Irvine is that they tell us like, we have no replacement positions. We call them FTE, full-time something or the others. The administration told us nobody gets any replacements. Somebody retires, there's no guarantee of replacement. But there are all these contests within the university for positions that you can apply to. So when your Shakespearean scholar retires, there's no replacement for him or her. When the new wave person, we don't, like in film studies we had it for a moment, but let's say the European cinema person retires, no replacement. So that's the reality of what's happening now. What that means for me when I look at this sort of notion of academic freedom and autonomy is that has been destroyed at the level of hiring because we're always competing. We're always competing with other departments. We have to show like this person is really great. And it's a lot of these initiatives are diversity initiatives. So, no one wants to criticize that because then you'd be called a racist, right? I mean, we want to diversify the faculty and there are these diversity earmarked FTE. And, the English department was like all white at UCI, just like 20 years, when I arrived. Yeah, I think it was like maybe one person of color. And it is much more diverse now. So you're like, okay, well, it's going to be, we have Asian Americanists, African Americanists. We have, people doing ethnic literature in the department that didn't have this before, that was very, old school, right? Because in a way that only California can be because they brought J. Hills Miller from Yale and they wanted to make UCI like Yale in the Pacific or whatever, like a mimetic situation. I don't even know what's happening with the Ivy League. Like that is just so fucked up. I don't even want to think about what their situation is. But I'm just talking about the UC, and we educate a lot more people. They may set the prestige monikers, but I once figured out on the back of an envelope that The UC at any given moment has about 300,000 to 400,000 undergraduates in it, and the Ivy League at any given moment, like, doesn't have more than like a couple tens of thousands. The scale is just so different, right?